Story 1: The Steam of Sleep. You are standing in the half-light of an Ottoman bathhouse, a hammam. They called it sometime around the year 1570. It is not day, not truly night. The streets outside are quiet. Only the echo of hooves on cobblestone interrupts the stillness. The city, perhaps Bursa, perhaps Istanbul, exhales slowly, as though the empire itself is trying to fall asleep. Inside these thick marble walls, the air is heavy with heat and the smell of lemon soap, old towels, and evaporating water. Bathhouses were not merely for washing. They were clocks that measured the city's rhythms, places where time slowed into ritual. Men and women bathed separately, often at different hours, and though the noon hours were busiest, there existed another schedule known only to a few: the midnight bathers, those who entered the hammam after the fires had dimmed and the attendants had grown quiet. The practice of the late bath was not recorded in law, yet whispered through diaries and in the marginalia of old ledgers. In these accounts, insomnia was treated not with herbs or potions but with steam. The sultans' physicians, attached to the Darushifa, the great hospitals of the empire, believed that sleeplessness arose from the imbalance of heat and moisture in the body. They prescribed bathing not only for cleanliness but for equilibrium. A man too restless for rest might find in the steam a kind of surrender. Imagine the space: a domed chamber with small glass apertures, oculus windows where moonlight filters in like diluted milk. Every surface glows faintly, slick with condensation. You sit on a marble bench, the temperature climbing with each breath. An attendant named Yusuf pours water over your shoulders, then disappears into the vapor. His motions are quiet, practiced, unremarkable, yet behind them lies centuries of inherited technique. The sequence of pouring, scrubbing, rinsing, and resting followed a pattern as strict as prayer times. The boredom was the point. In the repetition lay peace. Outside, the fires in the bath's furnace, the kulhin, are tended by a stoker, usually a former soldier or prisoner. His job is endless, monotonous: feed the fire, shovel the ash, never enter the bathhouse proper. His world is heat and darkness. He is known as a kulhinsai, and his name seldom appears in records. Yet without him, no one would sleep. The sultan himself might rely on the invisible rhythm of his labor. The hammam's design was architectural therapy. The domes collected sound so that every drip echoed like a heartbeat. The marble retained warmth, convincing the body that the world outside no longer existed. In the tepidarium, the warm hall bathers reclined on raised platforms called gerbek tashi, navel stones. They were not meant for luxury but for slow drying, the body cooling grain by grain. Physicians noted that those who lay too briefly on the stone risked the fever of the nerves, while those who stayed too long might faint into dreams they could not wake from. By midnight, the hammam was nearly empty. Only the most anxious or most powerful remained. Some were viziers who feared the insomnia that accompanied political guilt. Others were scholars, men like Katib Celebi, whose notebooks record sleepless nights spent cataloging maps and manuscripts. The bath was a way to wash thought itself. There are stories, dull, half forgotten, of the hammam attendants who memorized the personal temperatures of their regulars. They would adjust the heat by feeling the marble with their palms, never asking questions. This quiet knowledge, passed from apprentice to master, was a science of observation rather than words. The historian Pesevi writes that one such attendant in Edirne could tell by the scent of a client's towel whether he suffered from melancholy or excess bile. It was unprovable, unimportant, and entirely believed. For women, the nocturnal bath held another meaning. In certain districts of Istanbul, women would reserve late hours for solitude, away from gossip and the scrutiny of matrons. They bathed in near silence, exchanging herbal sachets of lavender and rose. Some records suggest that midwives prescribed the midnight hammam to new mothers who could not sleep. The sound of dripping water was thought to mimic the rhythm of the womb, guiding the body back to calm. If you listen closely, you might hear that drip centuries later echoing still. The hammam survives as a tourist curiosity, but the rhythm remains: scrub, Rinse, rest, repeat. The dullness of it is what made it sacred. Boredom, after all, was the empire's most reliable cure for wakefulness. And yet, one wonders. As steam rose toward the domed ceiling and condensed into rain again, did anyone ever question whether the heat cured insomnia or merely disguised it? Did they leave the bath renewed, or simply exhausted? In the Ottoman Empire, sleeplessness was not merely a personal discomfort. It was a sign that something in the body, or the world, was misaligned. To understand why the hammam was used as a tool to restore sleep, one must step into the mind of an Ottoman physician. At the core of Ottoman medical understanding was the theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Each was associated with a temperament and an element: warm, cold, moist, or dry. These principles were inherited from Galenic medicine but shaped by centuries of Islamic medical scholarship. By the 16th century, Ottoman scholars at institutions like the Suleymaniye Medical School believed health came from balancing these humors not through pills, but through lifestyle. Sleep was seen as a moist, cool state, the opposite of activity, which was dry and warm. When sleep would not come, doctors looked to correct this elemental imbalance. Was the patient too warm from excessive thinking, too dry from poor diet or anxiety, too cold from isolation or grief? The bath, in this view, was a place to reset the body's balance. Not too hot, not too cold, precisely warm and moist enough to persuade the soul to return to rest. Ottoman sleep cures thus included things like hot milk and sugar, scented oils, and the deliberate silence of marble chambers. But above all, they recommended the bath. Not every bathhouse would do. A proper hammam required clean water, a knowledgeable stoker, and a well-tempered dome. City inspectors, muezzebs, monitored bathhouses as part of their public duties. Their ledgers recorded temperatures, staffing, fuel usage, and complaints. These records, though dry, reveal a system of state-administered sleep hygiene. Consider this entry, copied from an inspector's ledger in Edirne, dated 1589. Hammam of the Candlemakers District. Water insufficiently heated, marble cold to the touch at third hour of the night. Complaint by 3 elders, bathmaster fined 2 acts. Corrected by next inspection. There was no mention of dreams. No one recorded whether the bath helped those elders sleep. But the system was working precisely because it concerned itself with boring, repeatable, measurable things. It's easy now to see these rituals as quaint, but within the empire, ritual was power. The hammam was part of a chain that began with the sultan's decree and ended in the water on your shoulders. A bathhouse was not just a place of healing. It was a controlled environment, a kind of architectural prescription. We must also remember that cleansing the body before sleep had religious dimensions. In Islamic tradition, washing before prayer wudu was required. Full-body cleansing ghusl was needed in certain cases, including after sexual activity or menstruation. The bathhouse, then, became a spiritual reset, preparing the body not just for sleep, but for the next prayer, the next day, the next round of obligations. Records from the Evkaf, the pious endowments that funded bathhouses, showed detailed instructions for operating hours. Some hammams were required to stay open past midnight, particularly during Ramadan, when sleep schedules shifted and worship extended long into the night. This further entrenched the idea that bathing was not a luxury but a right, tied to the body's needs and the soul's discipline. Among the wealthier classes, bathhouses were social centers. For women especially, they served as both retreat and performance. Bathing garments, slippers, and towels were status symbols. A woman might own embroidered hammam towels made from silk, stitched in the textile workshops of Bursa or Damascus. The act of preparing for the bath was often longer than the bath itself. Lotions were applied, hair combed with rose oil, slippers polished. All of this was done for an experience that occurred in near silence, with only the attendants and marble to witness it. But among the poor, the hammam was often their only access to consistent warmth and water. In winter, entire families might attend together, not out of leisure but necessity. Children too cold to sleep at home were taken to the bathhouse simply to warm up. These stories rarely survive in chronicles, but they appear in court records. A father fined for staying too long in the bathhouse with his sons during curfew. A widow allowed to visit the bathhouse free of charge, on account of a charitable endowment. In both cases, whether silk draped or shivering, the bath served the same function, to bring sleep closer. The boredom of the process was intentional. Sleep came not through drama, but through gradual surrender to heat, to silence, to routine. There is something strangely beautiful in how institutionalized sleep became. Today, insomnia is treated with prescriptions and screens. But in the Ottoman world, it was architecture, ritual, and trust in repetition. One does not think to ask whether marble echoes helped the mind quiet itself, but perhaps they did. And yet, what remains unclear is whether the rituals themselves were believed to cure or merely contain. Did the empire treat sleeplessness as a disease of the body or of the world around it? By the mid-19th century, the domes began to crack. Not suddenly, nor dramatically. There was no great proclamation that declared Ottoman bathhouses obsolete, but as trains arrived in Anatolia, as gaslights replaced oil lanterns, and as pocket watches became common among even the petty officials of the provinces, time began to move faster, and the slow rhythm of steam no longer seemed to fit. The hammam, once the empire's quietest pharmacy, found itself challenged by the clinic. Sleep, too, became a different kind of problem. Where Ottoman physicians had once spoken of humors and moistness, new doctors now measured pulse and blood pressure. French and German medical journals were translated into Ottoman Turkish. The balance of the soul gave way to the chemistry of the body. And the bathhouse, it remained but no longer as a cure. In Istanbul, the municipal authorities began issuing new hygiene codes. By 1871, bathhouses were required to install sewage filtration, use standardized fuel sources, and keep fire logs to prevent furnace accidents. These were necessary reforms, but with each new rule, the bathhouse lost a little more of its informal magic. Attendants no longer memorized individual preferences. Time slots were limited. Silence was replaced by scheduling. Even the fires once carefully managed by Kulhansis were gradually replaced by coal-fired boilers. The bathhouse, once attuned to the patient's insomnia, now served the broader needs of public sanitation. Some adapted. A few hammams in major cities advertised medicated steam or European-style therapies, offering eucalyptus-infused rooms and new services. Others closed quietly, their domes collapsing inward, their marble navel stones cold to the touch for the first time in centuries. And yet some stories survived. In a dusty corner of the Ottoman State Archives, a report from 1908 details an elderly man named Hamdi Bey, a retired clerk, who continued to visit the Semberlitash Hammami each Thursday night even after it had been converted into a private men's spa. He requests no oils, he speaks to no one, he lies on the marble for 1 hour and departs, no complaint, no remark. Was it habit, was it belief, or simply a memory he refused to relinquish? He would return home by carriage, wrap himself in a wool blanket, and according to the note of a neighbor, fall asleep without fail. For him, at least, steam remained stronger than modernity. The loss of the midnight bath was not mourned with ceremony. It faded, as old customs do quietly and with repetition. But the hammam had served its purpose for centuries. It had given people rich and poor, anxious and faithful a place to retreat from noise. To pause, to rinse, to sweat. To sleep. Even as Western medicine advanced, insomnia remained elusive. Doctors now prescribed tinctures of opium, then bromide salts, then barbiturates. But the core ailment, the mind's refusal to quiet, persisted. Today we write articles about sleep hygiene. We lower blue light. We count breaths. But somehow the boredom of the bath, the long, slow rhythm of silence, marble and heat still seems more anciently reliable. Modern Istanbul still holds a few working hammams. Tourists visit them for novelty, unaware that they are walking into a ritual once meant to treat the soul. Few enter at midnight. Fewer still ask for silence. But the domes still echo. The marble still warms. And if you were to lie quietly on the stone alone after hours, when the noise of the city has thinned to a whisper, you might find that sleep comes not with force, but with surrender. And so the question lingers. Were the Ottomans wrong to believe that sleep could be persuaded not by pills or distraction, but by boredom itself? Story 2, A Pillow of Law. How bureaucrats cataloged dreams in the imperial archive. The Ottoman Empire did not just govern land, taxes, or trade. It also, quietly, attempted to govern the night and the dreams that came with it. This story is about paperwork, and how a deeply bureaucratic empire found ways to record, file, and classify sleep, particularly dreams, disturbances, and omens within official state documents. Over 3 sections, we'll explore the legal and theological status of dreams in Ottoman court culture, the scribes and clerks who recorded them, the intersections of superstition, law, and night in the Ottoman worldview. It's easy to picture the Ottoman Empire as a place of swords, minarets, and caravan trade routes. But in truth, it was an empire of ink. Tens of millions of documents survive in Ottoman archives: endowment deeds, court rulings, weather records, and receipts for items as small as a bar of soap. The scribes who produced these, called katibs, were known less for their eloquence than their discipline. They wrote not to tell stories, but to preserve systems. But every now and then, in the margins of a tax register or the appendix of a Sharia Sicily Islamic court record, one finds something stranger. The merchant Hassan reports a dream in which a copper coin split in two, and his father wept. He takes this as a sign of failed enterprise. He requests release from his grain contract for fear of misfortune. A dream, recorded in the imperial ledger, catalogued, copied, and preserved for posterity. Why? To understand, you must first understand how seriously the Ottomans took signs, and how thoroughly they believed that the night could speak. In Islamic thought, dreams have long held spiritual weight. The Prophet Muhammad himself placed value on certain dreams, distinguishing between raya sadiqa, truthful dreams, and those stirred by anxiety or external influences. Scholars like Al-Ghazali and Ibn Sirin composed entire dream manuals. The Ottomans inherited this tradition, but they added something new: a filing system. Ottoman judges, or cadis, occasionally heard cases where dreams were used as evidence, not in the sense of proving guilt, but in influencing decisions about oaths, debts, or the interpretation of divine will. For instance, in a court record from Aleppo in 1672, a man named Yusuf appeared before the judge to request early withdrawal from a loan agreement. He explained that he had dreamt of 3 scorpions each biting his feet, and that this, according to the dream reader at his local mosque, meant financial danger. The judge consulted a religious scholar, who agreed the dream might indicate divine warning. The contract was annulled. The final ruling included the line, "Upon divine suggestion received during nocturnal vision and affirmed by local knowledge." It was boring, it was formal, it was recorded. The Ottomans were not unique in believing dreams meant something, but they were unique in the bureaucratic care with which they preserved them. In the Topkapi Palace archives, historians have uncovered an entire subcollection titled Dush Yorumlari v Mullahazeller, Dream Interpretations and Reflections. These were not scientific, they were not literary, they were simply reports, written by soldiers, merchants, scribes, and women through intermediaries. These reports often began with the formula, "It came to me in sleep." What followed was often mundane: "That the walls of my orchard fell," or that my mother handed me a loaf made of sand. These dreams were not always submitted as requests. Sometimes they were filed in case they became relevant later. In an empire as large and layered as the Ottomans, nothing was discarded without consideration. Even the irrational had a form to fill. In one particularly striking example from 1741, a scribe in Anatolia named Mehmet Efendi filed a letter to the regional governor detailing a series of disturbing dreams over the course of a week. He saw a black horse drowning in snow. He dreamt that his ink well dried mid-prayer. He interpreted these as signs that an administrative error would befall him. The governor's reply: "I have received your dreams. Let no action be taken until Friday. Observe fasting. Report again if the horse reappears." No action, no mockery, just procedure. What is most curious is not that these dreams were believed, but that they were managed. Rather than dismissing the unconscious as meaningless, the Ottoman bureaucracy treated dreams as potentially reportable incidents, part spiritual, part civic. It was not belief that powered the system it was filing. And so we are left with the image of an empire that tried ever so quietly to govern not only people and places, but also what they saw in the night. The question is, did these dreams ever truly shape policy, or were they just tolerated noise in an otherwise well-oiled machine of silence? There is no job listing in Ottoman records titled Dream Reader. No standardized salary. No clear rank. And yet, for over 4 centuries, nearly every provincial court and major mosque had someone, an elder, a scholar, sometimes a midwife whose task was to interpret the messages found in sleep. They were known by many titles: Tabersai, Ruya Yorumkusu, sometimes simply Bilge Kishi, the Wise One. What is most striking is not their presence, but the respect they commanded. In a world of ledgers, taxes, and war campaigns, these men and women operated in a parallel sphere, a whisper network of symbols, interpreting the night for an empire that valued certainty. Their influence was seldom direct. Rarely did they command decrees, but their readings, when recorded, became the hidden footnotes of power. To understand the importance of these figures, we must understand how symbols were read. Take, for example, a common dream motif found in dozens of Ottoman reports: a broken minaret. This image appears repeatedly in both Istanbul and provincial documents, often described in tones of mild dread. According to the most cited Ottoman dream manual, Kitab al-Takbarat, a broken minaret symbolized a disruption of guidance or faith. If the dreamer was a scholar or preacher, it was taken as a sign of impending public error. If the dreamer was a soldier, it might signal disorder within the ranks. One night in 1715, a local tax officer in Konya dreamt that the mosque beside his home lost its minaret in a lightning storm. The next morning, he filed a short letter to the Cadi judge, not requesting action, but simply stating, "I write this as a courtesy, that if trouble should arise in the southern quarter, you will know its shadow has already passed through my sleep." The dream was noted in the court register. 2 weeks later, a dispute did erupt between 2 artisan guilds in the very neighborhood mentioned. The judge cited the dream report not as proof, but as context. This is how non-authoritative knowledge functioned in the empire. It was not binding, but it was not ignored. Among the more curious interpreters were women, particularly midwives, and elderly widows who, outside the formal legal system, often served as community counselors. Their insights were rarely recorded directly, but their interpretations show up through others. In the city of Bursa, a 1763 entry tells of a pregnant woman who dreamt of birds flying through her window, pecking at her prayer rug. She recounted the dream to an who told her it signified the need for protective charms and uninterrupted prayer. She then asked her husband to consult the local imam, who transcribed the dream, its interpretation, and the resulting action into a formal petition to the Waqf board, requesting funds for better window shutters to keep the birds and ill fortune out. The request was approved. The logic wasn't that dreams proved anything. Rather, they offered narrative legitimacy, the sense that action, however small, was being taken in dialogue with the unseen. In urban mosques, especially those attached to madrases, Islamic schools, the role of dream interpreter sometimes fell to scholars of hadith, men trained in the traditions of the Prophet, who could distinguish truthful dreams, raya sadika, from illusions, home. These scholars treated dreams as a gray legal category, not binding like a fatwa, but influential like a sermon. There are records of such scholars being consulted by viziers, pashas, even members of the sultan's court, always informally, always off the books. Some dreams were sent by letter. Others were whispered during Friday prayers. Some were so sensitive they were deliberately mistranscribed to protect the dreamer's identity. A great man dreamt of a falcon trapped in his turban. The scholar advised silence. 2 days later, the falcon appeared in a court poem, as metaphor only. In this manner, dreams permeated the empire's daily life through paper, symbol, rumor, and private counsel. But perhaps the most revealing evidence of dream interpreters comes from the margins of official documents. In the imperial archives, alongside seals and signatures, one sometimes finds tiny scribal annotations, a curled line beside a name, a leaf drawn beside a date. These weren't embellishments, they were coded warnings, added by scribes trained to recognize symbolic danger in text. In one fiscal register from 1791, a tax figure is underlined with a red line and a small drawing of a falling star. The annotation explains: amount changed after accounting dream seen on Thursday. Refer to Mutavella's advice. The dream was not explained, but the result, a change in budget, was. What emerges from all this is a picture of an empire obsessed with pattern, yet humble before uncertainty. Where modern bureaucracies might ignore dreams, the Ottomans filed them not to act immediately, but to create a reservoir of meaning. This allowed the empire to remain flexible. A dream might mean nothing today, but everything tomorrow. Interpretation, after all, was as much about waiting as it was about reading. But this begs the question: if enough dreams said the same thing, would the empire listen? By the late 19th century, the Ottoman bureaucracy had grown heavy with reform. The empire, strained by external pressure and internal dissent, began to mirror Europe's institutions. The Tanzimat reforms, a sweeping series of legal and administrative changes launched in the 1830s, sought to modernize governance. Civil codes were drafted, ministries expanded, schools emphasized science over scripture. In this new vision of the state, dreams no longer belonged. Where once a petition might mention a vision of fire or a voice heard in sleep, now the language changed. Due to concern over economic instability, because of unrest in the Southern District, according to statistical records from the Tax Bureau. No more birds flying through windows, no more horses drowning in snow. It would be easy to say that dreams were simply dismissed as superstition, but the truth is more subtle. The clerical structure changed, and with it, the incentive to record the invisible. Under the new legal system, modeled partially on the French Code Napoleon, subjectivity had no place. A court could not weigh the symbolism of a broken minaret. A judge could not approve or deny a request based on a scorpion in someone's dream. These elements, once accepted as context, were now categorized as irrelevant. Even the language of petitions shifted. By the 1880s, the florid prose that once danced around omens was replaced by formularized templates. The petitions of Istanbul's shoemakers, cloth merchants, or widows were now written in bureaucratic phrases, standardized, impersonal, and dull. I respectfully submit, per Article 5 of the revised Urban Ordinance. No room for metaphor, no room for fear or birds. Meanwhile, the role of the dream reader faded into private life. Mosques continued to host wise elders, and some madrases still taught the old interpretive texts, but their words no longer shaped court rulings. Their symbols no longer appeared in annotations. In a way, they became invisible interpreters in an empire that had stopped asking questions. One can imagine a scholar in Edirne in 1892, still consulting Kitab al-Takbarat, still tracing patterns in sleep, but now only for neighbors, family, and pilgrims. His readings went unrecorded, his meanings unfiled. What had once been a state service became a whispered favor. Even so, traces of the dream world lingered. In a little-known set of memos from the Ministry of Public Works, dated 1901, a clerk writes about the unexplained delay of a bridge construction near the town of Takat. He notes, almost as a footnote, several workers have refused night shifts, citing bad dreams and shadow sightings at the base of the support pillar. No action was taken, but the note remained buried in a box of engineering records. This is how the dream world died within the state, not with rejection but with neglect. The archivists continued to file, the scribes continued to copy, but the content grew dry, procedural, bloodless. Dreams had not been disproved, they had simply become inconvenient. The empire was trying to survive, and sleep with its symbols and silences was now a private matter. Today, researchers combing through Ottoman archives find entire boxes of dreams. Some are categorized, others are misplaced, many are mislabeled, miscellaneous, anecdotal, not legal. Yet when one reads them, they reveal a quieter history not of wars and treaties, but of fears, hopes, and symbols that shape decisions in ways the official records never admit. A woman dreams of her husband returning home with no hands. A janissary dreams of drowning in ink. A court clerk dreams that the sultan turns into a mirror. No one files such dreams anymore. And so we are left to wonder, did the Ottoman Empire grow quieter when it stopped recording dreams? Or did it simply forget how to listen to the night? Story 3. The Candle Sellers of Galata. An Empire by Waxlight. Beneath the golden domes and grand decrees of the Ottoman Empire flickered a simpler truth. Everything that happened after sunset depended on wax. This story is about candles, the ones burned in sultans' chambers, scribes, desks, mosques, markets, and courtrooms long after the sun dipped below the Bosporus. It is about the candle makers of Galata, a district once considered peripheral, even suspicious, but which supplied the empire with the modest, melting pillars that made the night legible. Over 3 sections, we'll explore the social role and strange economy of candle makers in Ottoman Galata, how wax, oil, and flame powered nighttime governance and private ritual. The disappearance of candlelight as gas and electricity began to sweep across the empire. It is the year 1698, and you are walking uphill through Galata, the dense, labyrinthine neighborhood perched just across the Golden Horn from the grand mosques of Istanbul. The minarets are silhouettes now, faint outlines against a bruised twilight sky. Shops are closing. Bakers sweep flour into the street. But just north of the wharfs, the candle makers are lighting their own fires not for warmth, but for work. Their day begins when most others end. In Ottoman Istanbul, candles were not just household items. They were state infrastructure. Courtrooms were lit by wax. Religious observances used specific flame types. Private homes required small, shaped candles for evening ablutions and storytelling. Even the palace required certain kinds of odorless beeswax to burn near manuscripts and fabrics. The more a society relied on nighttime function, the more it depended on a steady, controlled burn. And that control came largely from Galata. This district, a former Genoese colony, had long been home to traders, artisans, and minorities: Armenians, Greeks, Jews, and converts. Many of the empire's candlemakers came from these communities, operating small, family-run shops near the Karakuri port, where fat, oil, and wax could be imported in bulk. Unlike more glamorous guilds, the armorers, tile makers, or bookbinders, the candle makers, Guild Mumcular Lankasi, rarely appears in grand imperial documents. Instead, it exists in fragments: lists of taxes, fire safety reports, supply records, and regulations so precise they seem almost absurd. One such rule, copied from a 1712 guild ledger, reads, "Wicks shall be twisted no more than 4 times per span, lest the flame burn impurely. All candles for court use must stand unaided for 2 hours. Beeswax to be procured from Edirne, or, if none available, Aleppo only. Tallow candles for common markets must be labeled thus." These were not guidelines, they were law. Because in the Ottoman view, candlelight was not trivial. It determined whether an imam could read scripture, whether a court record could be copied correctly, whether a surgeon could see clearly in the dim hours of dawn, whether the scribe copying tax codes would ruin an entire page because the wax puddled early. And so, it mattered who made the candles. In Galata, candle makers worked with extraordinary tedium. A single candle required hours, rendering the fat, filtering it, setting the wicks, dipping them once, twice, 10 times, cooling, carving, packaging. The process varied depending on use. Prayer candles were short, scholarly candles long and slow-burning, bureaucratic candles uniform in shape. Apprenticeship took 5 years. A master was not judged by artistry, but by consistency. No scent, no smoke, no slant. A candle that bent in heat could discredit an entire testimony in court. A wick that crackled might be taken as a bad omen during a marriage contract. The guild master, Ustabashi, was charged not with innovation but with reliability. One Galata candle shop, still active in the 1830s, produced 1,200 legal-use candles per month, all hand-dipped, hand-trimmed, and stamped with a guild insignia so small it had to be held to the flame to become visible. Among the most valuable commodities was beeswax, used in candles for the imperial library, treasury, and manuscript rooms. Beeswax burned longer and cleaner, with no smell to damage fragile inks. These candles were stored in sealed boxes, issued only by decree. A scribe could request 4 candles of the second hour burn, meaning a burn time of 2 hours, no more, no less. One surviving receipt from 1764 notes: issued 2 candles, beeswax half thickness, trimmed, for use by Selim Effendi, archivist. Purpose: transcription of damaged war records. There is no detail more dull than this, and yet in it, we see an empire attempting to engineer light itself, in service of permanence. Candle sellers in Galata were also watchers of sleep. They knew whose windows burned late, which houses required refills on odd nights, which scribes asked for multiple flame types in a single night. Some customers ordered candles designed to burn for a specific amount of time, a poor man's clock, melted hour by hour. We have, from 1785, a curious note from a judge who began his evening sessions only after lighting a wax candle with a known burn rate. When the candle neared its end, he concluded all hearings regardless of how many remained. The candle decrees the hour, the law follows the wick. Time, then, was not measured in bells but in melting wax. The dullest items sometimes hold empires together. Wax held the night open for those who worked after dark. It allowed the empire to extend its control past sunset, not through force, but through illumination. But this reliance on candlelight, on a fickle, physical flame, also meant that the Ottoman night was always at risk of failing. A poorly trimmed wick, a bad batch of wax, a forgotten shipment of tallow, and suddenly, the judge could not read, the imam could not recite, the letter could not be finished. Which raises the question, did the empire truly master the night, or simply learn to live with the darkness better than most? After sunset, the Ottoman Empire glowed with thousands of tiny flames. Each had a function, each had a place. And yet none was simply light. Candles were tools, yes, but they were also symbols, standing at the crossroads of the sacred, the domestic, the legal, and the poetic. To walk the empire after dark was to move between zones of flicker and shadow. The mosques glowed softly with ritual wax. Taverns burned tallow in metal bowls. Morning halls were marked with a single untrimmed candle. Storytellers used flames like punctuation. In this way, the candle was both illumination and boundary defining, where thought ended and imagination began. Small orange diamond candles and the ritual of watching. One of the more formalized uses of candlelight in the empire was during watches, extended periods of nighttime waiting, typically for mourning, religious observance, or legal duty. During muezzeb inspections, nighttime patrols were often accompanied by a junior clerk who carried a witness candle, a long, beeswax taper kept in a glass casing. It burned during interrogations or inspections, and if it extinguished prematurely, the testimony might be considered spoiled. The candle did not complete its full length. Witness statements voided. Matter postponed until Thursday. This practice may seem mechanical, but it reveals something deeper: the empire's trust in process, even when the tool of process was a flame. In homes, particularly among the more devout or the recently bereaved, candles were used in vigil, silent watching through the night. Mothers kept candles beside cribs. Scholars burned small wicks when copying texts as a symbol of clarity and caution. It is said that in Bursa, a library scribe lit a single candle each time he found a transcription error in an old manuscript. His study, by the end of a week, was aglow with the light of past mistakes. Small orange diamond, the language of light in faith and prayer. Candlelight held a quiet but crucial place in Ottoman spirituality. Though Islam generally avoids the ritual symbolism of candles common in some Christian traditions, Ottoman culture absorbed regional practices from Anatolia, the Balkans, and Sufi communities, many of whom used candlelight as a medium for contemplation. In Tek lodges, centers of Sufi ritual, candles were often arranged in circles or rows during dhikr, remembrance. The flame was said to reflect the light of the inner soul, flickering with each breath and heartbeat. In these sessions, the goal was not visibility, it was intimacy. A space softened by flame, a rhythm of shadows. The candle, like the chant, guided the soul inward. In private prayer, particularly during the long nights of Ramadan, candles played an anchoring role. Families would place a modest taper between dishes during sahur, pre-dawn meals, or at the center of the prayer room. The glow was not for seeing, but for presence, a reminder that even in hunger, the divine was near. Ottoman poetry echoes this idea. O flame that knows no sleep, guide me through this darkness, not to see but to remain unseen. Here, the candle becomes not just an object, but a companion to wakefulness. Small orange diamond candles and the geometry of power. Within the imperial court, candlelight was used with architectural precision. The Topkapi Palace employed candle stewards, whose only job was to manage light during ceremonies, nighttime audiences, and treaty signings. Every room had a light map, a layout dictating how many candles to place, how far apart, and at what height. During high-level meetings in the divan chamber, each vizier was given a personal candle in a silver holder, trimmed by an attendant every 30 minutes. When the flame guttered, the discussion was paused. The symbolism was subtle but intentional. An uneven flame meant uneven judgment. Candlelight was also manipulated to intimidate or flatter. Ambassadors were received in rooms where the only lighting came from behind the sultan's dais, creating a halo effect that rendered his features indistinct. Guests were seated slightly lower, so their eyes would flicker with the reflection of wax, making them appear anxious, breathless. It wasn't magic. It was candle design. In this way, wax became a diplomatic tool, melting slowly beneath the weight of empire. Small orange diamond candlelight in folk magic and fear. Outside the palace and mosque, candlelight served less refined and often unspoken purposes. In the alleys of Istanbul and the outskirts of Edirne, people used candlelight to read omens, cast fortunes, or keep away jinn. Midwives carried short blackened candles wrapped in cloth, said to ward off nightmares during childbirth. Candles were burned upside down to unwind curses. Some were floated in water to divine love or loss. One folk belief, recorded in a 17th century diary, held that if your candle went out without wind, it meant a secret had been spoken aloud even if no one had heard it. Even the Ottoman police, the Subashi, sometimes encountered these beliefs in their patrols. In 1782, during a nighttime sweep in Galata, an officer filed a complaint. Woman found burning 9 candles in a circle on rooftop. Claimed to be preventing husband's departure. Candles extinguished, no further penalty. No punishment, but still recorded. The state, even when it did not believe, still took note. What all this suggests is that candlelight was never just for sight. It was for timekeeping, for feeling, for fear, for marking the edge of the day and sometimes the edge of the self. And yet, as the 19th century crept forward, new forms of light arrived. Gas lamps, streetlights, oil lanterns, eventually electricity. And one wonders, what happens to people whose fears were shaped by flicker? When their nights become steady, cold, and bright. The fall of wax was not a collapse. It was a dimming, a slow, steady fade, one that few noticed at first. The flame, once central to Ottoman life after dark, did not disappear overnight. Instead, it was replaced bit by bit until its absence felt normal. It began, as many things did, with the Tanzimat reforms. Small orange diamond gaslight and the new Ottoman night. In the mid-19th century, the Ottoman state embraced a wave of modernization. Steamships, railways, European codes of law, and among them, public gas lighting. In 1856, the first gas-powered street lamps were lit in Beyoğlu, just steps from the same Galata candle shops that had supplied the courts and homes of Istanbul for generations. They burned brighter. They burned longer. They didn't need trimming, dipping, or watching. The empire took notice. By 1863, Istanbul's main thoroughfares were lined with gas lamps. Municipal lighting offices were formed. Budget lines shifted. Wax orders shrank. Candle makers filed complaints, some requesting subsidies for their declining trade. A few tried adapting, offering decorative candles or scented wax for high-end customers, but the bulk of their function was fatting. One guild ledger from 1871 reads, of the 31 candle masters in Galata, only 11 remain active. The rest have sold their tools or entered the oil trade. The slow, flickering burn was giving way to a fixed, industrial glow. Small orange diamond electricity and the end of flicker. If gaslight bruised the candle's dominance, electricity ended it. By the 1890s, Ottoman elites, particularly those with European educations, began installing electric lights in private homes. Embassies were among the first, followed by hotels, banks, and eventually the palace itself. The Yildiz Palace, once illuminated by rows of handmade wax tapers, underwent full electrification under Sultan Abdülhamid II. The official record of the transition notes: removed 462 wax fixtures, replaced with electric fittings. Result: improved clarity, less smoke, greater safety. The report did not mention atmosphere. It did not record how the shadows changed, how the silence felt different, how time seemed to stretch less under a bulb than it did beneath a flickering flame. Small orange diamond candlelight and the collapse of ritual. As candles left official use, they also faded from ritual. Religious spaces still use them on occasion, but increasingly as symbol, not source. In homes, pre-made oil lamps or imported lanterns took their place. Even in mourning, where the candle had long stood vigil, people began to light glass-shielded kerosene lamps, safer, brighter, cleaner. But something was lost. The candle had not just lit the night, it had measured it. Its slow burn told the scholar how long to copy. Its fatting edge told the storyteller when to end. Its melting form marked the time a widow spent in prayer, or the hours a clerk spent in silence. Electricity was instant. It could be turned on and off. The candle could not. It required patience, presence, attention. It demanded that one stay with the light. Without it, the rhythm of the night changed. One former scribe, interviewed in 1912 by a French ethnographer, lamented, "I used to know how many lines I could write before the candle bent. Now with these lamps, I do not know when to stop." He was not speaking only of writing. Small orange diamond, a quiet trade, remembered. By the early 20th century, the candle sellers of Galata were nearly gone. Some of their workshops became storage spaces. Others were turned into storefronts for imported lamps or European novelties. The old guild records, once fastidiously maintained, stopped around 1910. No final entry, no declaration, just nothing. A silence where flame had once been. Today, a few artisanal candle makers remain in Istanbul, mostly for tourists, nostalgic households, or ceremonial uses. They offer twisted tapers in gift boxes, shaped beeswax in Ottoman motifs. But these candles do not guide courts, guard vigils, or time the stories of scribes. They are memory, ornament, echo. Yet in the archives, the old candle receipts remain. So too do the ledgers. The notes about wick length. The complaints about smoke. The burn times calculated to the minute. They are boring, deliberately so. And yet, in their dullness, lies a record of how an empire held the night in its hands. One taper at a time. So we end with this thought. When the Ottoman Empire abandoned candles for modern light, did it illuminate the night more clearly? Or did it lose the last flicker of deliberate darkness? Story 4. The Sultan's Pharmacist. Recipes for calm in an age of conquest. In an empire that spanned deserts, forests, and mountains, where battles were fought by day and treaties signed at dawn, sleep was an administrative necessity. This story follows the quiet work of the Ottoman palace pharmacist specialists in insomnia, melancholy, and the subtle art of calm. It is a history not of war, but of survival in silence, of how the mind was managed through syrups, scents, tonics, and routines. Over 3 sections, we will explore the daily duties of the palace pharmacist, Hekimbashi, the recipes and regimens used to induce rest, how court life created sleeplessness, and how medicine responded not with haste, but with ritualized boredom. It is midnight in Topkapi Palace. The domes have cooled, the lamps are dimmed, the tiled halls are silent except for the soft crackle of oil in bronze lanterns. Somewhere, a eunuch checks a door latch. In the harem wing, a concubine prays quietly before curling beneath embroidered linen. And in a corner room behind the Sultan's private chamber, a man named Mehmet Shifai stirs a thick, bitter syrup into a porcelain bowl. He is the palace pharmacist, and he is preparing a recipe for sleep. The role of the Ottoman court pharmacist was not simply to mix herbs or store jars. It was to monitor the equilibrium of the imperial household body, mind, and mood. In a palace as layered and symbolic as Topkapi, the pharmacist served not just the sultan but his mother, Valide Sultan, the Grand Vizier, high-ranking scribes, concubines, and occasionally even janissaries stationed near the inner court. Each had different needs, each had different sleeplessness. One might suffer from anxious dreams, another from political exhaustion, another from the side effects of diet, wind, or travel. And for each, the pharmacist prescribed not pills but rituals. Small Orange Diamond the Palace Pharmacy, a room of jars and silence. The Enderun Exahanesi, or Inner Court Pharmacy, was a windowless room lined with hundreds of ceramic vessels, each labeled in Ottoman script and arranged according to season, temperament, and purpose. There were calming powders, Miyan Bali, licorice syrup for throat and temper, Afian Makunu, opium paste, tightly controlled and rarely issued, Sandal Agasai Yagi, sandalwood oil for soothing fever dreams. There were dried herbs wrapped in cloth, lavender for the restless, adasi for digestion, melissa for melancholy. There were instructions always handwritten, never printed, for how to administer each dose. Steep 3 pinches at dawn, cool, and serve in copper cup. Stir with silver only. To be taken with silence. The pharmacist's role extended beyond mixtures. He maintained records of sleep, often dull, precise notes. His Majesty did not rest until 3rd hour past moonrise. Requested fennel infusion, reported racing thoughts. Or, Valide Sultan slept after cardamom tea. Dreams not reported. These notes, preserved in palace archives, were part of a broader system of health management, a kind of imperial sleep hygiene, tracked like inventory. Small Orange Diamond sleep as strategy. Why such concern for sleep? Because sleep was not leisure, it was function. A sultan deprived of sleep could issue faulty decrees. A vizier overtaken by fatigue might mishandle a petition or provoke the wrong ally. Even the scribes, who copied laws and treaties at night, required calm minds to avoid legal errors. Sleep was not seen as escape, it was seen as preparation. Court physicians believed, following Greco-Arabic medical tradition, that poor sleep unbalanced the humors, producing not only fatigue, but cruelty, forgetfulness, and spiritual doubt. Melancholy in particular, was considered a threat to rule. It was associated with brooding, indecision, and isolation. If a sultan's behavior changed, the pharmacist was consulted. He might alter the diet, introduce incense, or prepare a bitter tonic of wormwood and cinnamon, believed to purge dark thoughts. In this sense, the pharmacist became part therapist, part logistician, restoring not just health, but governance itself. One anonymous record from the late 1600s describes a night when Sultan Maimed IV refused to sleep after news of a failed campaign. Rather than argue, his physician prepared a steamed cloth soaked in rosewater and mint, laid it over the Sultan's chest, and read aloud from the Book of Kings. The Sultan fell asleep mid-sentence. It was not magic, it was method. And yet the pharmacist worked with no glory. He was not summoned to councils. He issued no commands. His work was kept behind closed doors, marked only by sealed jars and fatting labels. Still, he was indispensable, because empires, like bodies, could only function with a rhythm of rest. And so we ask, did the pharmacist truly induce sleep? Or did he simply maintain the illusion that rest could be controlled? Among the quietest duties in Topkapi Palace was the preparation of Makunlar thick herbal pastes designed to adjust mood, relieve tension, and gently escort the sleepless mind toward rest. These were not medicines in the modern sense. They were blends layered and slow, drawn from Arab, Persian, and Anatolian traditions, refined over centuries, and adapted by the Ottoman court for use at dusk. The palace pharmacist did not prescribe them freely. Each macun was customized, its ingredients selected by temperament, age, season, and circumstance. There was no universal cure, but there were patterns. Small orange, diamond, the four macuns of night. Surviving recipe books from the 17th and 18th centuries mention several pastes commonly used for sleep and calm. Here are four of the most common, drawn from palace records and physician manuals. 1. Macun letter 131 Leogul, the poppy rose paste. Ingredients: ground poppy seeds, dried rose petals, honey, lemon balm, coriander. Use: for restlessness due to worry or excess thought. Texture: smooth, slightly bitter with floral aftertaste. This paste was commonly used among scribes and mid-level officials. It quieted the active mind, without inducing full sleep. Physicians believed it was best taken an hour before sleep, accompanied by a bowl of warm goat's milk. 1 spoon, silence after, an 18th century instruction reads. 2. Macun letter 131 Humyun, the imperial paste. Ingredients: saffron, crushed pearl, sandalwood oil, clove, date syrup. Use: reserved for members of the imperial family. Texture: dense, fragrant, slightly spicy. This paste was considered a tonic for both body and mood, taken after long ceremonies, mourning, or travel. Saffron was believed to warm the spirit. The inclusion of powdered pearl was symbolic, calming the blood, easing tension, and reminding the user of clarity and stillness. It was served on a silver spoon and followed by a light rosewater rinse. 3. Macun letter 131 Tilsum, the paste of charms. Ingredients: valerian root, cardamom, dried fig, vinegar of quince. Use: for nightmares or disturbed sleep. Texture: grainy sour, taken in small quantities. This blend was associated with night omens and used by both palace women and guards. If a dream had caused unrest, this paste was taken with a pinch of salt, followed by a recitation from the Quran and burning of juniper incense in the chamber. It was a ritual as much as a remedy. 4. Macun letter 131 Sesislik, the paste of stillness. Ingredients: lavender, dried plum, barley flour, a whisper of opium. Use: for those suffering from grief, fevered dreams, or political stress. Texture: soft and earthy, almost tasteless. Perhaps the most subtle of all, this was the pharmacist's last resort, not served to the young, nor to the emotionally unstable. It was for men of state, grand viziers, military commanders, advisors whose minds had grown too heavy to rest. Instructions strictly required that it be taken in full darkness, with no music, no voice, and no reading. The dose was small. The expectation was not sleep but drift. Small orange diamond teas, tonics, and the flow of warmth. Pastes were only part of the solution. Often, the pharmacist would prescribe infusions, warm liquids sipped slowly, prepared with care. These were chosen to match seasons and personalities. Fennel tea for bureaucrats in cold months. Chamomile and apple peel for mothers and concubines. Licorice root water for singers and readers. Boiled quince with cinnamon for melancholics and exiles. Most were not served in bed, but in sitting rooms, often with a single candle, a wool shawl, and an instruction to remain silent for half an hour before lying down. This was called the cooling hour, not for temperature, but for emotion. Small orange diamond scents and sounds for the restless court. For the more subtle cases, those who could not sleep, but did not want to admit it, the pharmacist relied on ambient tools. He might send a sachet of dried rose, mint, and clove to be placed under the pillow, a ceramic bottle of cedar oil to dab on the inner wrist, or in rare cases, a reed flute player from the Palace Music Guild to sit in the corner and play a single scale over and over until the listener's breath matched its tone. There was no rush, no applause, just monotony until the body gave in. Small orange diamond when remedies failed. Not all slept. There are records brief, unadorned of those whose rest never returned. One grand vizier, after the death of his son, refused all makhans. A concubine, displaced during a palace reorganization, tore her sachets and flushed her tea. A clerk, dismissed for a copying error, began lighting his own room with 3 candles at once to confuse the hour. The pharmacist in these cases could only record. No change. He could not force sleep. He could only prepare the conditions. And this was the true philosophy behind the work. That rest is not induced. It is invited. Through habit, scent, warmth, dullness, and time. So one must ask, did the pharmacist cure insomnia? Or simply surround it so gently that it agreed to leave? By the final decades of the 19th century, the language of rest in the Ottoman court began to change. The terms that once filled physician records, temperament, melancholy, excess heat of the chest, or dryness of mood, were gradually replaced by phrases like mental fatigue, nervous disorder, and chronic sleeplessness. The pharmacist was no longer seen as a guardian of balance, but as a curator of old methods increasingly overshadowed by imported European science. And so, quietly and without ceremony, the recipes for sleep were folded and stored. No longer copied. No longer requested. Small orange diamond Western medicine in the Ottoman court. The Tanzimat reforms, 1839-1876, reshaped many Ottoman institutions, law, education, and public health chief among them. European doctors, especially French and German, were invited to modernize imperial medicine. They brought morphine, sedatives, clinical diagnoses of hysteria and neurasthenia. The idea of insomnia as pathology, not imbalance. Under this new regime, ritual was discarded in favor of dosage. Where once sleep was courted slowly with syrup, tea, music, and silence, it was now measured in milligrams. The packing of the old pharmacist, his handwritten instructions and his hours of patient stirring, seemed increasingly irrelevant. One scribe from the early 1900s lamented in a private letter, "They say now that sleep is a matter of chemicals. But where then do they store the heart?" Small orange, diamond, the closing of the inner pharmacy. The Enderun Exahanesi, the inner palace pharmacy, was formally closed around 1908, though it had long since stopped preparing sleep remedies. Its ceramic jars were inventoried, sealed, and stored in museum archives. Many of the substances inside had hardened into chalk. Some, like sandalwood oil or powdered pearl, were labeled obsolete. Others were simply discarded. The room was later converted into storage for telegraph equipment. In the ledgers of the imperial household, the pharmacist's name disappears entirely by 1910. No final entry. No farewell note. Just blank space where once daily sleep records had been kept for over 300 years. Small orange diamond sleep after the empire. The dissolution of the empire in the early 20th century scattered many of its remaining traditions. Former palace officials fled, retired, or adapted. Their roles, once shaped by ritual, were redefined by modern institutions. Hospitals replaced pharmacies. Sleep became the subject of neurological study, not spiritual balance. Records from the newly established Turkish Republic reflect this shift. Insomnia now appeared in military reports, school health files, and asylum records. It was still a problem, but no longer one addressed with rosewater or lavender. It was now treated with restraint, injection, or dismissal. Yet a few stories remained. In 1927, an elderly former palace clerk was interviewed by a local historian. When asked about the old sleep pastes, he smiled and said, "They never worked, but they reminded you that someone was trying." That perhaps was the point. Not the effectiveness, but the gesture. The quiet spoonful. The warm tea. The reed flute at the edge of the room. Sleep could not be commanded, only welcomed. And so, as the 20th century accelerated with clocks, schedules, telegrams, and electric light, the night lost its slowness. The boredom, once medicinal, became something to be cured rather than inhabited. But in the records of the palace, buried in dry script and dull ledgers, we still find the rhythm of that slower time. Rested after quince water. Woke during the second watch, no remedy requested. Slept with balm at temples, dreams unreported. These are not dramatic. They are not even particularly interesting. And yet they reveal a civilization that once believed the art of rest was worth chronicling, day after day, patient after patient. So we are left to ask, did the empire lose sleep when it lost its pharmacist? Or did it merely forget how to make room for silence? Story 5, Dust and Discipline. Janissary bedtime drills. To build an empire that never slept, the Ottomans needed soldiers who could rise in silence, dress in darkness, and follow orders without words. This story explores the nightlife of the Janissaries, the elite military corps of the Ottoman Empire, not in battle, but in barracks where silence, dust, and discipline governed their every breath after sunset. Over 3 sections, we'll examine the daily sleep rituals, rules, and routines in Janissary barracks, the connection between military silence and psychological conditioning, how the fear of disorder after dark led to drills that trained men to sleep like machines and wake like ghosts. In the heart of Istanbul, just behind the Hagia Sophia and a short walk from the Sultanate Square, stood the Asemi Akagi, the Rookie Hearth, the training camp for the Ottoman Janissaries. From the outside, it looked like a modest set of buildings. Long, low barracks, wide courtyards, stone kitchens, and tiled fountains. But at night, the Asemi Akagi became something else, a machine of silence. Here, sleep was not a personal act. It was a function of discipline. The Janissaries Yenisariler, or new soldiers, were formed from the Devshirme system, which took Christian boys from the Balkans, converted them to Islam, and trained them in absolute obedience to the Sultan. They were elite not because of their bloodline, but because of their conditioning. And that conditioning began at bedtime. Small orange diamond where and how they slept. Each recruit was assigned a sleeping mat, folded precisely and stored during the day beneath a wooden frame. At dusk, after the evening meal and ablutions, the mats were laid out in perfect rows. The head always faced east. No exceptions. There were no pillows, only rolled cloth. No blankets beyond a shared wool cover. Each man kept a small candle, a water flask, and a wooden spoon within arm's reach. Boots were placed in identical positions at the foot of each mat. One regulation, copied from a Janissary manual from 1607, reads, "No soldier shall rest with boot soles upward. No spoon shall rest upon cloth. Disorder in rest shall reflect disorder in duty." It was not poetry, it was policy. The barracks were silent after sundown. No talking, no coughing without turning away. No lamp allowed after the final call, only embers, and those were banked. An appointed senior called a bashsavush would walk the length of the barracks, listening for violations. One of his tasks was to identify. Whispering, minor infraction. Snoring above the allowed limit, punishable by bucket of water. Late turning, considered a sign of a distracted or rebellious mind. Each offense was logged in the silence ledger, Sukun Defteri, a document so dry that even other bureaucrats considered it tedious. Yet in it, we find notes like, "Night of 17th Muharram, 3rd row, second man turned twice, sounded throat, water issued. Night of 4th Safar, snoring over threshold, mat moved 1 meter as warning. These are not the records of warriors. They are the records of sleep discipline. Small orange diamond drills in the dark. Twice a month, the Janissary rookies underwent a night drill. The lights were extinguished without warning. A wooden mallet struck a bell 3 times. No words were spoken. The soldiers were expected to rise, fold their mat, tie their belt, don tunic and boots, stand at attention in formation, all in under 3 minutes. In total darkness, without a single shout. If anyone failed, the drill restarted. These exercises were designed to mimic a night attack. But their purpose went deeper, to create soldiers who could function entirely on internal order. There is a 17th century training record that notes, on the 8th trial, all stood before the water jug was emptied. Order was silent, that is the goal. Small orange diamond sleep as obedience. For the Janissary, sleep was not about rest, it was about submission. You were not allowed to oversleep. You were not allowed to dream aloud. You were not permitted to lie awake beyond the allowed period of stillness. Dreams, when reported, were logged. Talk of nightmares was discouraged. Sleepwalkers were marked as uncertain and sometimes transferred to non-combat roles. One commander, Hassan Aga, wrote, "If a man cannot control himself at rest, how shall he hold rank in chaos?" Even rest had to follow the chain of command. The result was a corps of men who could sleep on stone, wake without cue, and assemble without sound. It was not heroic, it was not even comfortable, but it was the basis of imperial defense. In an empire that stretched from Hungary to Yemen, from Algiers to Baghdad, the first line of enforcement after dark was not a sword, it was a man who could wake without hesitation. And so we ask, were the Janissaries truly rested? Or were they simply trained to act like it? The Janissary code was built on order. But no code is absolute, especially not when human minds lie down in the dark. After the final roll call each evening, the barracks fell quiet. But not all slept. Some men stared into the darkness. Some clenched fists beneath blankets. Some counted breath, floor tiles, thoughts. There were no official terms for insomnia, trauma, or stress in Janissary manuals, but they existed written between the lines, tucked in marginalia, or whispered from bunk to bunk when the officers passed. Small orange diamond, the quiet weight of duty. Unlike most soldiers in history, the Janissaries were not conscripted peasants or hired mercenaries. They were converted captives, raised from boyhood to be state property. Their identity was forged not through love of homeland, but through ritual, drill, and indoctrination. And though this system produced discipline, it also produced pressure, the need to appear silent, sharp, unquestioning, even in moments of personal collapse. Reports from internal audits occasionally reveal cracks in the image. One barracks entry, dated 1681. Soldier Ismail failed to rise at third bell. Woke confused, refused water, struck own chest. Doctor summoned, no illness found. No punishment issued. But he was transferred 3 weeks later to Odenluck Nurbeti Woodpal duty. That was often the solution. Move the problem, not treat it. Small orange diamond illicit aids, contraband for calm. Despite strict rules, many Janissaries developed personal remedies for restlessness, most of them forbidden, all of them boring. Among the most common, boiled onion water drunk cold, bits of clove or dried orange peel, hidden in belts and chewed before bed, flat stones placed beneath mats for grounding, coal applied beneath the eyes to pull away heat. And most daring of all, tiny folded paper amulets containing verses or protective words, sewn into shirt linings or placed under blankets. Possession of muscalar was discouraged, but they were rarely punished. Too many officers used them too. These small comforts were not officially recognized, but in practice they were tolerated so long as they did not disrupt the silence. Small orange diamond sleep and superstition. Even the most hardened soldier carried a handful of beliefs. Some feared sleeping directly under open beams, believing it invited bad dreams. Others avoided facing mirrors at night or kept knives beneath pillows to cut the air. The dreamer's dilemma was a recurring issue in barracks life. Dreams, especially those of violence, mutiny, or desertion, were considered dangerous to speak aloud, yet too disturbing to ignore. So soldiers invented a rule. Tell your dream to the stove, then it will not follow you. This involved whispering unwanted dreams into the barracks fire, usually during early morning kitchen duty. The idea was that the fire would burn the thought, sparing the mind further trouble. One soldier, caught doing this repeatedly, was not punished, only relocated. His record read, "Given to horseyard post, dreams too frequent." Small orange diamond faked sleep and internal resistance. Among the more subtle forms of rebellion was simulated sleep, a tactic used by janissaries to avoid drills, inspections, or punishment. This was done with precision. Breathing slowed to mimic deep rest. Arms placed in regulation position. Eyes never fully shut but slack. One officer, writing in 1712, complained, "They sleep too well. Better than real men sleep. How can I tell if they are ready?" This sort of performance, pretending rest to resist authority, was sometimes the only private act a soldier could perform. It was not loud, it was not heroic, but it was a form of bodily protest. Small orange diamond, the midnight escapees. Very rarely, janissaries left the barracks at night. Not desertion, but quiet slipping into alleyways, mosques, or bathhouses. Istanbul was vast, and even the best patrols could not watch every gate. A 1794 ledger includes this line. Night of March 3rd. Soldier Ahmet found praying behind candle shop. Said he could not sleep for fear of burial dreams. He was returned without punishment. No mention of reprimand. No further entry. Just a record that someone sought stillness elsewhere. All of this suggests that beneath the image of perfect order, the janissaries developed their own ecology of rest, one made not of official doctrine, but of rituals invented in silence. And perhaps the empire allowed this, not because it approved, but because even the most powerful army needs men who sleep, or pretend to. So we ask, were the janissaries obedient, or did they simply master the art of quiet defiance? The janissaries were once the empire's most disciplined men. They slept in rows. They rose without orders. They obeyed the night as strictly as they obeyed their commanders. But by the 18th century, that silence once sacred had begun to crack. Not all at once, not even loudly. Just enough that by the time the noise arrived, no one remembered how quiet things had been. Small orange diamond, the rise of comfort, the fall of order. With each generation, the janissaries grew less dependent on the barracks and more entangled in civilian life. They took side jobs, opened shops, married, bought property. What was once a strict monastic order began to resemble a guild, influential, entrenched, and increasingly indulgent. And with that shift came changes in nighttime life. Mats were replaced by cushions, candles by lanterns, regulated sleep by personal preference. One account from 1767 complains that janissaries in the Istanbul barracks sleep where they choose, when they please, and with what company they prefer. The silence of the corps has become the noise of the quarter. In some units, night drills stopped entirely. In others, they were done for formality, only a shadow of training, not its substance. The barracks once described as a temple of obedience, became a dormitory of reputation. Small orange diamond dreams of power, not sleep. By this period, janissaries were no longer whispering dreams to the stove. They were enforcing curfews, taxing market stalls, even influencing political appointments. Their former silence became assertive presence often after dark. Sleep, in fact, became a secondary concern. Many janissaries began frequenting coffee houses, where games, poetry, and debate stretched into the early hours. Records from Galata in 1792 describe patrols encountering off-duty janissaries. Found 4 soldiers in second coffee house past midnight. Playing draughts, no boots worn, no arms carried. When asked to return, replied that the hour was for rest, and the mind must first be calmed. Not untrue, but a far cry from the silence of earlier decades. Small orange diamond, the breakdown of ritual. By the early 1800s, internal records show that many barracks no longer enforced sleep formations. Mats were placed wherever space allowed. Some janissaries refused to participate in night inspections, citing fatigue or injury. Commanders complained that the Sukun Defteri, the silence ledger, was no longer kept accurately. Some were found to have copied entries from earlier years to avoid writing new ones. And then, in 1807, a note appears in one of the last complete silence ledgers from the central barracks. Tonight's entries impossible. Barracks too crowded, no clear rows. Orders ignored. No punishment. No correction. Just resignation. Small orange diamond, the auspicious incident, a final awakening. In 1826, Sultan Mahmud II abolished the Janissary Corps in a violent purge known as the auspicious incident. Over 4,000 were killed. Barracks were burned. Records destroyed. It was not just a political act. It was a cleansing of old forms. When the barracks were searched, they found no silence ledgers. No mats in rows. No drills in preparation. Instead, they found coffee pots, lamps, books, cards, and makeshift beds, signs of men who had not obeyed a night command in years. The silence, once so feared and admired, had long since been broken. Small orange diamond, what the empire lost. With the janissaries gone, the Ottomans built a new army, modern, European, rational. It marched in formation, wore matching coats, used rifles, and followed clocks. But it lacked the night logic of the janissaries, the sense that rest itself could be a test of discipline, and that how a man slept was as revealing as how he fought. There were no more sleep drills. No mat formations. No whispered reports about snoring or late turning. The new army used barracks, but they were modeled after Western camps, efficient, bright, pragmatic. Sleep was no longer a ritual. It was a schedule. And so we are left with fragments. Manuals describing how to fold a mat. Ledgers tracking dreamers. Notes about boots, candles, coughs. Boring, yes. But these details made the janissaries more than warriors. They were men trained not just to act but to be still. And when that stillness vanished, the empire's nights were never quite the same. So we ask, did the janissaries lose their power because they stopped sleeping in silence? Or did they stop sleeping in silence because they had already lost their power? Story 6, The Bureau of Silence. How the empire counted snores and whispers. An empire that ruled millions did not fear armies in the night. It feared the creak of an ungreased gate, the cough of a neighbor's child, the whisper that woke a sleeping judge. This is the story of sound, not the loud kind, but the barely audible, and how the Ottoman Empire attempted to track, regulate, and even quantify silence. Over 3 sections, we'll explore how noise was treated as a civic matter in Ottoman cities, the strange bureaucratic forms that recorded sounds too faint to echo, and how silence, once valued as a public good, became one of the most fragile commodities in a growing empire. To walk through Ottoman Istanbul after midnight was to hear almost nothing. A few distant dogs, the gurgle of a fountain, a night guard tapping his staff once every 40 paces. But if you were to stop, hold your breath, and listen carefully, you might hear something stranger. A man whispering about silence, his voice barely rising above the hum of sleep. He was a nocturnal inspector, an officer of the Bureau of Silence, Sultan, a department so little known that even many citizens of the empire never knew it existed. Small orange diamond, while the empire regulated quiet. In Ottoman urban life, noise wasn't just nuisance, it was disruption. The empire prized stillness, particularly at night. Cities were crowded, rooms shared, walls thin. The hours between the evening prayer Yahtzee and the morning call to prayer Sabah were meant for rest, reflection, and recovery. Anything that disturbed this neighbor's loot. A heavy door, even excessive coughing, was viewed not as annoyance, but as a failure of civic order. As early as the 1500s, Ottoman judges, cadis, began issuing decrees regulating nighttime sound. One such ruling from Bursa, 1544. Let no merchant unload goods after the second call. Let no baker stoke fires after the last prayer. Let no dog roam unfed, lest it howl. This was not moralism, it was logistics. An empire that governed sleep required silence. Small orange, diamond, the birth of the Bureau. In the 17th century, the increasing density of Istanbul and other cities, along with growing complaints from judges, scholars, and bureaucrats, led to the quiet creation of a new position, the night silence officer, or Sultan Katibai. These men were not soldiers or spies, they were listeners. Armed with nothing more than a ledger, a lamp, and a short staff, they walked designated districts between midnight and dawn, recording animal noise, human conversation, doors or shutters slamming, footsteps out of rhythm, and in rare cases, snores loud enough to escape the house. Their ledgers survive in fragments. One entry from Üsküdar in 1691 reads, 3rd Street past the bathhouse. Child weeps in sleep for 47 paces. Door hinge cries without wind. No correction needed. Another from Edirne, 1753. 2nd hour, voice heard female song. Too distant to identify. Note for future patrol. There was no punishment. Only recording. The purpose was not to police, but to observe the thresholds of quiet. Small orange diamond, citizens reporting silence. But not all entries came from patrols. Many came from complaints filed at local courts, mosques, or coffeehouses by citizens who valued their sleep. These were written in soft, respectful tones, rarely accusatory, often poetic. A petition from a shoemaker, 1780. The man above me breathes too freely. It disturbs the stillness between breaths. I ask only for slower sleeping, if Allah permits. The judge responded, he shall be asked to place cloth above the floorboards. Let rest be mutual. No fine. No shame. Just the careful curation of the night. Small orange, diamond, the sounds that were tolerated. Not all sounds were forbidden. Certain noises were allowed, even expected, as part of the night. The soft clink of a prayer bead string. A quiet fountain. The sweep of a broom in the early hours. A mother humming to a sick child. The tap of the Bexi's staff, the night watchman's way of saying, I am awake so you don't have to be. These were considered structural sound signs that the city was breathing, not breaking. But anything unfamiliar, a stranger's voice, a rhythm out of place, was noted. Because if silence is a language, then noise is a kind of accent, one that doesn't belong. And so we return to the Bureau of Silence, an organization that wrote no laws, issued no punishments, held no banners. Just a man, with a lamp, recording the sounds of a sleeping empire, one whisper at a time. So we must ask, did the Ottomans preserve silence? Or did they merely try to count it before it was gone? By the early 1700s, the Bureau of Silence had expanded. No longer just a handful of listeners roaming quiet streets, it had developed clerks, coordinators, and district officers. Still humble by imperial standards, fewer than 100 men total, but their presence was noticed, especially by those who preferred to be left alone. Small Orange diamond the ledger as a tool of control. Originally, the night patrols simply noted sounds. Loud doors, coughing neighbors, footsteps on rooftops, nothing that required action. But as the empire grew more centralized and internal dissent began to trouble the court, something shifted. The Sukun Defterleri, silence ledgers, were no longer just reports. They became cross-reference documents. A footnote here, a name repeated there, a phrase that sounded just slightly political. A voice overheard late at night saying, "The vizier is a fool," written down in calm ink but flagged. One entry from 1729. Voice heard at third hour. Mail said, "The tax rises like fog, and so shall we." No correction made. Noted only. That phrase, "so shall we," was later found in pamphlets seized during a baker's strike. The voice was never identified, but the ledger's entry became part of the investigation file. The Bureau of Silence had become something more than a sleepy office of sound. It had become a bureau of patterns. Small Orange, diamond the political value of noise. In the Ottoman mindset, order was both spiritual and practical. Anything disruptive, whether a rebellious poem or a loud goat, was considered a break in harmony. By the mid-18th century, nighttime sound became a metric for measuring unrest. Certain patterns began to emerge. More complaints from poorer neighborhoods. Louder streets near mosques with preachers critical of officials. Unusual silences in areas previously active, as though fear itself had muffled the night. These weren't random, they were mapped. There is evidence of a short-lived program introduced in 1771 called Geese Haritasi, the Night Map. It was not decorative, it tracked locations of frequent silence violations, number of anonymous complaints, reports of gatherings in back courtyards. Each district was given a noise trust index. A lower score meant more patrols, more listening, more questions. Small Orange diamond whispers in the hammam. It was not uncommon for gossip to reach the bureau. Much of it came through public baths, where silence was relaxed and speech carried through steam and water. Bureau officers were sometimes posted nearby to listen for criticisms of the sultan, complaints about conscription, rumors of price fixing or merchant cheating. One document from 1792. At Tercine Bathhouse, third chamber. Men spoke of Janissarian discipline. Said they don't walk like soldiers, they snore like pigs. Noted for record, names unknown. A harmless insult. A deeper sign of tension. The Bureau never said. But they wrote it down. Small Orange diamond snoring as social status. Not all noise was political. Some was class-coded. In wealthier homes, snoring was considered a fault of the poor, a product of bad bedding, coarse diets, and emotional unease. Some landowners filed official noise complaints against tenants beneath them, citing disruptive breathing, irregular movement, or nocturnal crying. One wealthy woman in Ayup petitioned the judge. "The girl below me sleeps in pain. It rises through the floor like smoke. I am a woman of letters, I require rest." The judge replied, "A cloth rug shall be issued to her. If pain persists, let her sleep nearer the window. In this way, sleep became an index of status. The quieter your rest, the higher your place. Those who made noise, especially without meaning to, were considered either uncivilized or unwell, and either way, they were documented. Small orange diamond punishment without verdict. Unlike most bureaucratic arms, the Bureau of Silence rarely issued punishments directly. But their reports were read. If a man's name appeared more than 3 times in silence ledgers for snoring, packing, or speaking too freely, he might find himself reassigned to a less desirable work district, denied access to guild promotions, or quietly passed over in court decisions. There was no formal charge, just a trail of noise, a record that he was unquiet. And yet, even with all this structure, the Bureau never shed its most fundamental character. A man in the dark listening, writing what he hears, unsure whether it matters until someone decides it does. So we ask, was the Bureau of Silence protecting sleep? Or was it just teaching people to be afraid of being heard? By the dawn of the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire was changing. Steel replaced wood. Schedules replaced call to prayer. And silence, once curated by soft footsteps and listening men, became an afterthought. The Sultan, the Bureau of Silence, was still on the books. But no one had read the books in years. Small orange diamond, the encroachment of noise. The first real challenge to institutional silence came not from politics, but from infrastructure. With the introduction of European-style printing presses, metal tools, and later steam engines, Ottoman cities grew louder by necessity. Carriages rattled on stone streets. Clocks chimed in courtyards. Street sellers shouted their wares deeper into the night. Coffee houses hosted musical performances well after midnight. An 1824 complaint from an elderly jurist in Galata reads, "The night is filled with foreign tools and Ottoman excuses. There is no longer room for thought." The Bureau recorded the letter. They did not act. They no longer could. Silence, once a civic expectation, had become a preference, and preference was no longer enforceable. Small orange diamond, the Tanzimat, and the death of listening. The Tanzimat reforms 1839–1876 ushered in sweeping changes across the empire, modernization of laws, governance, and public administration. In the process, many smaller offices and cultural institutions were either absorbed or dissolved. Among them, the Bureau of Silence. A brief memo, preserved in the 1841 Administrative Restructuring Archive, reads, "The duties of the Bureau of Night Observance are now considered merged with district safety committees. Individual sound reports no longer required." The last known Sultan Defteri A silence ledger is dated 1840. It ends mid-sentence. Today, the wind speaks louder than men. The rest is missing. It may have been ripped out, or simply left unfinished. Small orange diamond, the sound that replaced stillness. In the years following the Bureau's closure, the empire embraced urban expansion. Street lamps, trams, and factories reshaped the cityscape, and with them, the soundscape. Nighttime was no longer silent. Men now worked through the night in textile mills. Wealthy homes hosted late-night salons. Public clocks, imported from Vienna and Paris, struck on the hour, regardless of who was trying to sleep. A citizen could still complain. But now they complained to a municipal office, filled out a form, and waited for a decision based on volume levels or district ordinances, not community harmony. In other words, silence had become procedural. The listening had stopped. Small orange diamond, what was lost. With the end of the Bureau came the quiet disappearance of subjective noise, the kind that could only be noticed by knowing a neighborhood walking its streets, and understanding what silence used to sound like there. The coughs of a nervous tenant, the third step that always creaked in one home, the way a door side shut instead of slamming. These weren't crimes. They weren't disturbances. They were differences. The Bureau had once existed to notice difference, not to punish it, but to name it, preserve it, and, if necessary, soothe it. Its loss was not dramatic. It was gradual, like the fade-out of a familiar lullaby. Small orange diamond remnants and echoes. Today, fragments of the Bureau of Silence survive only in fragile ledgers in regional archives, petitions written in fading Ottoman Turkish, and in the vocabulary of old neighborhoods, where elders still refer to unusually quiet nights as Sukunlu Geceler, not just quiet, but bureau quiet. Some scholars have tried to resurrect interest in these practices, framing them as early urban sound management or pre-modern acoustical governance. But the truth is simpler. The Bureau did not govern noise. It governed expectation. It was built on the belief that how people rest matters, and that sometimes the faintest creak, the softest sigh, deserves to be noticed and written down. So we ask, did the empire abandon silence? Or did silence abandon the empire?